Did you ever hear about system dynamics but never really understood where it's all about? In this episode, we spoke to Vincent de Gooyert, working at the Methods Group of Business Administration at Radboud University, Nijmegen. In his research, he reflects on the role of moral and instrumental justice in societal transformations towards sustainability, such as the energy transition, carbon capture, or sustainable plastics.
I will try to act as if I'm comfortable.
First, we're very happy you're here. Yes, welcome. Welcome. Yeah, we're happy that so many people took the time to sit here and have a conversation about transformations, justice, and futures.
I'm at the research method department, and a lot of the work that we do, a lot of the research that we do is applying and developing participatory research methods. So we start from this notion that there's some of the challenges that we're currently facing, the grand societal challenges are so complex and so messy that there is not one individual expert that can overlook everything and decide what's best for us, for society. So using that as a starting point, we apply and develop methods that help to put different experts together, different stakeholders together, and then together try to map the complexity of a challenge to then achieve different goals, like developing a shared language. How do we understand what kind of challenge we're facing? Trying to imagine different futures of what would be a more desired situation, but also creating a shared understanding that then could act as a platform that helps to then have more effective, coordinated action towards achieving common goals.
Well, I'm not sure if we should already start with the critical question, but I'm sometimes wondering about this participatory approach, because everyone is like, oh, let's do participation, also the municipalities and other organizations. And then if you look in practice, it's often a checking the box exercise from, oh, look, we had a participatory approach, and then we basically did what we were planning to do anyway.
I definitely see the challenge. So, and there's also a lot of literature on that symbolic participation, or if it's felt as if it's only symbolic participation, then the whole process might do more harm than good.
Exactly.
The literature of procedural justice, for example, talks about this. So, I think it is a real threat. What I'd like to do is to distinguish between two aspects of this participatory research. One is the product, the result. So you have this long process, and in the end you have a result, and that's the decision that you're going to make, or the policy that you're going to implement. Mm-hmm. So that's where I see this danger. Maybe that's the same solution that they were also considering before engaging in this process. Mm-hmm. It's also the part that I don't typically see as the most valuable part. What I see as the most valuable part is more the process, the discussions that emerge when you put these very different people with very different mental models in one room. Mm-hmm. What then almost always happens is that you get conflicts. And not necessarily bad conflicts. No, it's not like, at least that's what we try, not to have interpersonal conflicts. But it's the whole aim of these processes to surface conflicting views and to try to resolve those conflicting views. And in that process of resolving these conflicts, people learn, and there's new insights. And that's something that I see in this process, and that's if after a project I think back, okay, what I'm now the most proud of, mm-hmm. It's often that instance where someone changed his or her mind. It's that instance where someone said, okay, I now have a new insight, I learned something, I changed my mental model. Yeah. And that's difficult. You could even say it's painful, it's uncomfortable, because you had this deeply held belief, I know how the world works, I know that this is the situation and this is the preferred solution. But this whole idea of participating in the stakeholder dialogue assumes that at some point, some of those participants will let go of that initial understanding that they had and replace it by something else. But that's not easy. You need to say goodbye to that deeply held belief that you had.
Yeah, but it's also interesting because if we look at the iceberg model, then it's like the very obvious things that we see, the actions, and then it's the structures underneath and the mental models. And they always say it's so difficult to change these values and mental models. So how what do you do to really enable this value chain? And maybe can you give an example to make it a little bit more tangible?
Sure. Yeah. So there are a lot of necessary conditions that need to be in place. So you need a lot of commitment to start with. Everybody needs to free up time in their very busy schedules, and they need to come to that location that you've decided to have this workshop, and they need to be open. Those are already very big necessary conditions. But I do see it happen. Just to give an example, so we work in these European research projects that are mainly technology driven, for example, on carbon capture and storage. A large share of the money is about getting the technology to a next technological readiness level, the innovation element of this European project. But there's also social science on, well, what are the societal implications of implementing this technology? And we also do participatory processes within this consortium. So these are large projects with 20 plus partners and all coming from very different backgrounds. But we all contribute to this goal of mitigating climate change. And in this project through capturing CO2. And then, of course, everyone agrees to some extent, okay, technology is important. That's one starting point. Another starting point is, technology is also not enough. Technology is maybe even not the bottleneck. Whether we are going to mitigate climate change, the technology is out there. But whether we can organize it and implement it, the social question is maybe even bigger. So that's the context in which we have these participatory processes, these stakeholder dialogues. And what I see, and I also measured this with pre and post test questionnaires. And what I saw is that a lot of the researchers in such a consortium have a technological orientation and convinced, if I ask, okay, what are the key enablers and barriers? Can you rate them? How important is this barrier? Then they really have this technology orientation. But if I ask the same questions after we did this stakeholder dialogue, after we mapped all the complexity of this challenge, then I have evidence that they changed their mind. Then I see the social aspects, the justice elements. I see those becoming, well, maybe not important, but at least I see a more balanced view of both the technological and the social aspects of these challenges in how they value the different enablers and barriers towards climate mitigation.
Okay. And not really just scientific output.
No, it's also what we write about. So one example is we organized a stakeholder dialogue at the North Sea port. That's the port of Ghent and Terneuzen. That's both in the Netherlands and in Belgium. They have a large challenge. They are emitting over 10 megatons of CO2 per year. That's something that they need to decarbonize. How to do that is a tough challenge. We organized a stakeholder dialogue, and also there we did a round of interviews on beforehand. And in those interviews, we typically see strong convictions about what are the key enablers and barriers. Like people saying, well, it's all about subsidies. It's if we just have the right subsidies in place, then we will do the investment, and then there's a business case, and then we can roll out and scale up, and then we'll decarbonize. Then we have the stakeholder dialogue, and that's where we see that different participants bring in different viewpoints, also talk about, but what about the employees, what about the jobs, what about how the cost and the benefits of that decarbonization is distributed, who are the winners, who are the losers, and we see a different type of understanding emerging. We see how. So there's technology that needs to be implemented. And when is it going to be implemented? If there's a business case. When is there a business case? Well, that will not emerge automatically because it's about avoiding negative externalities. It's about avoiding CO2 emissions that are now either cheap or free to emit. So there will not be a business case if you don't have policies that assign a value to that negative externality. And what will determine whether we will assign that value to the negative externality? It's a societal process in which society decides, okay, which value do we attach to that? How much money do we value avoiding those CO2 emissions compared to using that money to do other stuff?
That's a nice output. So this is what you described, system dynamics, right?
So system dynamics is a method that we use in our research, and it really put the emphasis on trying to see the bigger picture, trying to look at the bigger whole. So typically the more technology-oriented research would, or maybe even the more traditional way of doing research is trying to isolate, trying to reduce as much as possible. A traditional research method is an experiment in a laboratory where you try to isolate as much as possible. You don't want any interference. So if you then see how A influences B, you are quite sure that it is because of your change in A, because all other changes are by design excluded. So that's the traditional way of doing research. In systems approaches, of which system dynamics is one approach, we almost take the exact opposite approach. We try to look at the bigger picture, at the whole. We don't want to reduce, because there are certain characteristics, and not just certain characteristics. There are very important characteristics that determine whether in the end we have a just transformation or not, that you can only see if you look at the whole system. You cannot simply add up all those isolated experiments and then think you know how the system will behave. Because the behavior of the system on the level of the whole system is something that emerges if you put all those things together, and that you won't see if you only study the details in isolation.
Yeah, and I had a look at the article, and I thought what was really interesting is that this system dynamics approach looks across boundaries of disciplines, so also sectors. And one of my approaches is the making of future, and this is really interesting because how can you think about making of futures? Because it's not only what you plan, but there's a whole bunch of consequences also from your action. And I think the system dynamics helps there.
Yeah.
And so how does this process go? Do you say something about that?
Yeah, so system dynamics offers a structured way of thinking through the dynamics of a problem. So how does a problem evolve over time? You do that by systematically mapping the causal relationships that are responsible for the behavior of the system. And through doing that, you are allowing yourself to make your mental model explicit. How do I believe that the world works? And of course, it's not a silver bullet. It's not that you can predict the future by doing that. But the motivation in a lot of these applications of system dynamics is that we see in a lot of problems that there are unintended consequences after policy implementation. So a policy is implemented and then something happens, and in hindsight we say, well, couldn't we have seen this coming? And this approach helps to probably not avoid all of that, but maybe some of that by very explicitly mapping out, okay, if we do A, what happens next? So it has a very explicit view on time, looking back into the history, what caused this problem in the past. Also looking forward, thinking about, okay, now if we change something, what else will change?
Yeah.
So it increases the likelihood that you will already think about what would otherwise be unintended consequences, and try to mitigate them through additional policies that help to alleviate those.
So 2 questions, and then you can go. Sorry. One is, well, this is really good, I think, for policymakers to do. So one question is, how often is this done? It is not a common practice for policymakers or business people to think this way, I guess, or maybe it is. And then a more critical question is, this causal relationships are common sense, I think, and you say correctly that it kind of depends on your mental model. But then aren't the people who are at the table most of the times sharing a certain mental model and not having a very different idea of cultural relations, which are non-Western or maybe non-well educated?
Okay.
But still, they are there and they might have some influence.
Okay. Yeah. So what do they usually do? So I think that a lot of policymakers try to imagine, okay, what kind of, at least I hope that they try to imagine what kind of unintended consequences could emerge if I implement this policy. But but I think that we can help justify people to spend time together. We offer a process and a platform where it's where we invite different people to do this together. And I think that's where a lot of added value is. But of course, that added value really depends on who is in the room. Yeah, and sometimes, you're limited by the worldviews that the people bring. And always, at the end of that process, you're in the best position to decide who should have been in the room. Because that's when you have learned about the problem and you know, oh, wait, we still have a blind spot. I think we have a blind spot.
Is there ever a follow-up that you say at the end, so we do it again?
Yeah, we recently did a project on sustainable finance. So we tried to have the financial sector in the room. So we had pension funds, we had the Nederlandse Bank, the National Bank, we had all kinds of decision makers, governments in the room. We tried to have the financial sector in the room. And this was a collaboration with TU Eindhoven, but also the Sustainable Finance Lab, different collaborators. And beforehand, we try to imagine, okay, what type of directions might this discussion take? There could be very different discussion. One is, if you talk about sustainable finance, it will be about investments in green technology. Well, that's one discussion. It could also take the direction of the global north versus the global south, a very different discussion. It's also about sustainable finance, but it's very different. We ended up concluding that probably because of the people that were involved, which is also a consequence of organizing this in the Netherlands on location, it was more a discussion on investments in green technology than a discussion on global north versus global south.
Yeah, more sustainable ways of financing.
Yeah, it's both are about sustainable ways of financing, but they're very different. So is it about indicators that pension funds use to decide how to allocate their funds, or is it about changing how the International Monetary Fund works, or how the World Bank works, or what kind of other institutes need to be in place to have sustainable finance? So it's a very different discussion. So this discussion is bounded by the people that you invite. We try to be aware of, okay, how does the involvement of these people and not others influence the discussion that we had? And then, we try to be clear about the limitations of the results that we have. So the recommendations that we have, the conclusions that we make are apply within the scope of the problem that is influenced by the people that we involved. And it does not apply to these other challenges that are also relevant, but that we did not address because we didn't have those people involved.
Yeah. But the decisions being taken there could still be relevant for global countries, right? So it's
sure.
So that really shows also the issue of procedural justice, that if certain people are not at the table, then their anticipated future is not being considered.
Yeah, and I think it's also I think what is important is that we keep on reflecting on that, and that also the people in the room are aware of the limitations of the discussion that we have.
But I'm actually wondering, do you also see strategic behavior in these discussions? There are certain actors that are like, oh yeah, but this is going to happen, or if we do this, then this and this will happen. Where they try with the future that they expect to happen.
Where does power come in? I do see power dynamics that play an important role in the group dynamics, but this is very different for the different. We typically have different stages in such a group process.
Yeah,
it starts out relatively safe, so we try to map the complexity of the system together. So this is a relatively neutral or objective, you could say, as far as possible, because you talk about how do we think that the world works. If A goes up, what happens to B and C, and
do you try to get a common understanding of how the world works, or do we allow different?
No, we try to reach consensus. So if there's a conflicting view on causal relationships, we go into that discussion until it's resolved. And that often, luckily, also happens because we have a very systematic way of approaching such discussions. We often end up with resolving those conflicting views. And what I see in this group process is we have different stages. In the first stage, it's more like trying to understand what the current situation is that we're in. And that's a stage where I see people open to learning, exchanging views, and they share information. And then there's this other stage where we're trying to discuss, okay, what are now the implications, given that this is the nature of the problem? What is now the best thing to do? And then we often see a different dynamic emerging. Then we see people not sharing all information. Then there's this tendency to think about your own interest again.
Yeah.
How would implementing this policy affect my interests? And of course, if you're trying to talk together about how can we change something, how can we achieve a better future, then it is a bit of both. You do try to exchange views and learn from each other, but it is also a negotiation where in the end, well, there's a certain course of action, and that will serve some interests and not serve others.
And do you see in these strategic behavior negotiations, do you also see how futures are being used? For example, somebody saying, well, if we do this, then CO2 emissions will go up, and that's why that's not a credible solution?
Yeah, so that's what we also explicitly try to encourage, because typically in the first stages of these processes, we focus on building a model, building a diagram that shows the complex reality that we have to deal with. And then the later stage is more focused on using that model. When we talk about, okay, what is now the best thing to do to make this desired future happen, then we encourage people to use that model that we built collectively and that we all committed to. This is our new shared understanding of the situation. Now we can just imagine that we implement a solution and follow the arrows in the diagram to then think through, okay, what would happen if we take this action? So that's how we then try to use the results of the earlier phases in the later phase.
Are there any concepts of future studies or justice that you like to use? Like I heard procedural justice for example, but maybe there's some backcasting or expectations or...
No, not that often, actually. No, so, and it really depends. What we typically do is we have this participatory process, but that's not the only thing that we do. Before we design that participatory process, we often have a round of interviews to already gauge what are the different worldviews. It helps us to prepare that participatory process. We already know what are the sensitive issues, what do we need to pay attention to, and we also contrast what we hear in those interviews and what we hear in the group workshops with scientific literature. So we iterate between those different data sources. And for us, this participatory process is important and valuable because the process is even more important than the product. It's really about that change that people that participate in the process go through, the learning that they do, the new insights that they gain, the commitment that they create towards implementing the resulting recommendations. But we also iterate with scientific literature. So depending on what the type of the role that they see in power differences, information asymmetry, justice elements, in the role of achieving that desired future or not, also feed back into the search that we do into the literature, and that's what we then try to connect back. Yeah, at the end, we write this paper and we answer the research question, and then for us, we try to treat those as data sources that are comparable. They are all data sources.
And what would what were the keywords for the literature review in your last article? So just to get a sense of
We had one instance. So recently we had a project with this was the Ministry of Energy and Climate asking a group of experts to help identifying pathways towards a carbon neutral Dutch energy system in 2050. So we had a participatory process. There are all these disciplinary experts, most of them professors in a certain discipline. One on geography, the other on finance, the other on industry, the other on technology, innovation, all kinds of disciplines. And of course, they all have very good ideas about how to achieve a carbon neutral energy system in 2050. But you would like for that team to also find some synergy. What kind of insights can they generate by exploring this challenge together? So rather than just having separate recommendations, one on finance, one on innovation, one on industry, you would like them to develop a shared language.
So where they also support each other, or where the interactions between them.
Yeah, where they explore the overlap between because in the end, it's all interrelated. How finance evolves depends on how technology evolves and society.
One thing, a shared language. Can you give an example of words you invented or some words that others took?
Well, I can share an anecdote on shared language.
There we go.
Good bridge.
No, so
something.
So depending on the project, we have different purposes for organizing these participatory processes, and often there are multiple purposes that we try to achieve simultaneously. But sometimes it's more concrete into the direction of what is the best policy to achieve goal A and B. Sometimes it's even more explorative. It's even more uncharted territory, and the whole goal of having a shared language is already a challenge in itself. Let alone then using that language to identify what the best course of action would be. So and in these projects where a shared language is the most relevant purpose, we see the value of actually developing that. We see what kind of confusion can emerge because you don't have a shared language. So we see different participants in our participatory processes using the same words, but with very different meanings. And because we force them to be very explicit. We don't have a free discussion where people just tell stories. No, we ask them to be very systematic. Okay, what is the causal mechanism that you believe will determine the pathways into the future? And that's when they need to be very explicit. They define their concepts by also showing what it's influenced by and what it will influence. And that really helps to be more explicit about the terms that you use. So, for instance, we were in this project at the North Sea port, which has a challenge of becoming carbon neutral in the future. And so that challenge of carbon neutrality involves different aspects. One is not using fossil fuels as a fuel anymore. So no oil, gas, and coal as a fuel for the energy. But a different challenge is not using those same resources as a feedstock anymore. So especially the energy-intensive industry, the petrochemical industry, not only uses coal, oil, and gas as energy source, but also as a feedstock. They change that substance into something else. So plastics is made out of oil, fertilizer is made out of natural gas. So it's the input, and you use energy and then create an output. And that's also something that we need to address. If we want to become carbon neutral, we cannot have all oil, coal, and gas as energy source and not as feedstock. Avoiding fossil fuels as energy source, that's a challenge that we have a shared language for that now.
Okay.
We do know, renewable energy, we know what that is. Nuclear, okay, we don't always have a shared language on that. Is that sustainable? Is that green? But for the challenge of replacing fossil feedstocks, that's really further into the future. That's really where a shared language is non-existent yet, and that's what we see in our participatory processes. For example, circularity is a term that typically pops up in such discussion. Okay, instead of having fossil feedstock, well, if we can replace that by reusing products that we already made, that would be one way of replacing those feedstocks. But in the discussions that we had with the decision makers of of energy intensive industries, heavy industries, in the room, we noticed that they used the term circularity. That the term circularity had very different meanings for them. So for one decision maker, the term circularity meant, okay, yeah, so I don't use fossil feedstock anymore, so I need to switch from supplier A to supplier B. I'll just ask another supplier for the circular feedstock. And for another decision maker, it had a drastically different meaning. For that person, circularity meant, okay, I need to replace my factory. My current factory will not have a role in this new circular system. So I need to replace this factory by a new one. Yeah, so that's really where a shared language is relevant. And where we really see in these participatory processes, through systematic structure that we ask the people to follow, that these different interpretations of the same terms emerge and surface.
I think I'm not sure, but it seems like if I'm hearing shared language, I'm like, oh yeah, just agree on the term and then we're done. But the way you describe it, it's like the fundamental thing, because it's not only a shared language, it's a shared vision, it's a shared where do we go? Because the nice anecdote with the two companies, the one just adjusting a little bit.
Yeah, so you could say that, so where we see that the term is used differently is like that's this tip of the iceberg.
Yeah,
it represents different paradigms, and that's what we also see in collaborative research, consortium research. Use the same terms, and then if we start to understand, hey, wait a minute, if you use that term in a larger context, you use it differently than I do.
Yeah.
And if you then dig deeper, you find, oh wait, that there's really a very different paradigm underneath the way that you use and interpret that term compared to another.
Do you also see this for justice? Because I mean, there are very different ideas on how to understand justice, how to distribute the burdens, the benefits, who should be included.
Yeah, we also see the term justice used in very different ways. So for some, it really immediately they jump towards this instrumental view on justice, because for them it's self-evident that if you talk about justice, you talk about avoiding resistance. If you distribute the burdens and the benefits fairly, then it helps you with a smoother implementation. And for others, as soon as you use the term justice, it's self-evident that it's a normative view on justice. It's because it's not, you don't distribute the burdens and benefits fairly because it helps you to smoothen implementation. No, because it's the right thing to do. It's a moral obligation, and that's a very different view on justice. And the approach that you take will also might lead you to a different application of the terminology and a different distribution of burden and benefits.
Did you also see, because that's one distinction, of course, but there's also what we saw, for example, in the energy transition is where people, so Nijmegen at one point, everyone got a €50 voucher to buy something for the energy transition. And it's funny how different people reacted to it, citizens, when we talked to them. So the one said, like, I'm rich enough, I don't need it. So they say it's like, give the more money to the most vulnerable. Whereas someone else said, like, why does everyone get the money? I paid my taxes. Why does somebody who doesn't pay taxes also get it? So more merit-based. So I think this normative view is, of course, also can be very diverse on how to interpret it.
Yep.
And I'm always struggling, okay, how can you find consensus there?
Yeah. Well, I think it's already a large step if you can try to distinguish between the different views there are on justice. So a lot of our projects are on energy-intensive industry, and what we typically see there is, so there are different views on what is the future of energy-intensive industry in Europe, in the Netherlands. Some say, well, it's our moral obligation. So you could very easily reduce CO2 emissions by just not producing anything anymore. Then you also don't have emissions. But that's not what we want. No, we want to still fulfill societal needs, but then with factories that don't have greenhouse gas emissions. And then you can even see that as a moral obligation. We want to supply, also fulfill the societal needs of not only our own society, but also other societies. That sounds noble. A different view is that, but what then about those other societies? Do you not take away their opportunity to fulfill their own needs? And what kind of implications does it have that you still want to hold on to this model where we serve the interest of other societies?
Yeah.
Is it not now time for them to serve our societal needs? And what are the implications of that? What would that future look like? So yes, there's a very flexible use of the term justice and how it's applied on the future of energy-intensive industries. Very different ideas on that.
Interesting, flexible use. I would say political, strategic use, but
I'm not sure.
But that's what I call everything, right?
I can not look into the mind of those people. So it also sounds noble. We want to fulfill the needs of those other places as well. And it's all about what do you see as the alternative? What is the counterfactual? So do you believe that if we don't produce in a sustainable way, do you then believe that in other places in the world they will produce in an unsustainable way? That's undesired for us and for others. But if you believe that if we produce less in a sustainable way, others will take over and do the sustainable production of also the products that we would like to consume here, then that's the better option. So it also, I think a lot of these different views on what is also the moral thing to do here depends on what you believe that the counterfactual is. What happens if you don't do this?
We actually had once a policymaker who told us, we're not going to talk about just transition anymore because we don't know what it is. We talk about not avoiding an unjust transition, which... Well, my cynical view was like, yes, you go. And the other view was like, that's maybe also not a way to go. But it's very interesting.
Avoiding an undesired future instead of...
You could wonder, probably that terminology will steer the discussion. I mean, think about the different types of justice, especially something like restorative justice.
Yeah.
So not only avoiding negative consequences of this transition, but also using the transition to repair injustices from the past might be typically something that you will not see if you change the language into, let's not have an unjust transition. But that might remain in the picture, in view, if you talk about just transitions. So that terminology might already have implications for what you consider and whatnot.
We should have time to do research together, right? Because you're always with partners, Now we're talking to Delft and we talk to Amsterdam, as to make a consortium and their stakeholders, etc. But then we're so close, but nobody has time. And I think if we put all the people together in a room that we spoke to this series of interviews, people have to commit. But that would be really interesting. So to explore this justice futures, because we do so much. And we're not aware.
Because you could also do a participatory process where pulls everyone to then map where we have commonalities.
Yeah. And you can lead. You can lead that.
Or not.
And then we also, Vincent, thanks so much for being here with us. It was fun talking to you.
Very insightful.
Very insightful. And I think there's a lot of connections actually that I wasn't aware of. Any last words?
Even more connections
than we thought of.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for the invitation. And I really liked the conversation also because it allows me to think about and reflect on what we're doing, but which is, after a number of years, it becomes self-evident to us. But you learn to think about it in using different terms. Also here, the terminology determines how you think about the topic. And you help me in applying new ways of thinking on what we're doing.
Let's explore this further.
Yeah, let's do that.
In the future.
Cool. In the future. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks. Nice. So you're actually working on geoengineering?